grow with this as well. But we wanted to get some beginning material, some beginning recommendations in the hands of instructional leaders to, again, provide as much assistance and support as possible. With you today are members of the Network for Educator Effectiveness team. First off, my name is Tom Hairston. I am the Managing Director of the Network for Educator Effectiveness. Really excited to be doing this work. My daughter will be going into a remote learning environment as a first grader. And so ensuring those effective instructional practices are taking place is near and dear to my heart, especially for the year coming ahead. Also with us is Kathy Losing, a phenomenal instructional consultant for the Network for Educator Effectiveness. She may be answering some questions as they come up. Wealth of experience, wealth of expertise, and look forward to contributions she makes to today's session as well. Kendra Christians, our growth director and marketing director, is also here. She will be the one facilitating the chat. And so as you have questions, again, do enter those in via chat. Kendra will take care of those and coordinate with us who will respond and who will get first dibs at the microphone before moving on to any further responses. Also with us is Mark Doss, the co-founder of Network for Educator Effectiveness. He will be here, also able to answer questions as they come in as well. So again, really excited to be with all of you and to be answering questions that you have. Let me talk a little bit about the logistics of today's sessions before we get into the topic at hand. First of all, this session is structured as a Q&A session. I'm going to spend the first 20 to 30 minutes of the session talking through some of the registration questions that you all entered when you registered for this webinar. I'm going to talk through those and provide some overviews on some of the main topics that came up again and again. After that, we will then answer and address questions that you all have. To submit a question or to address a question, please use the chat feature within Zoom. Again, we have that pulled up. If you need help finding that chat feature, that will be on your Zoom toolbar. Most of you should see an icon that says chat. Some of you won't see that icon that says chat. If you don't see it, you should see an icon that says more, and you can click on that more button, and a drop-down menu will appear, and you should see a chat option there, and that will get you joined in and ready to engage via chat. As I mentioned, we will monitor those questions as they come in. Also, just to help with this process, if you have a question specific to your district or specific to your school, please ask that via our help email, which is nee@missouri.edu. There'll be a much better way for us to triage those specific questions as they may come up. And so if you do have, again, a specific question, please send that to nee@missouri.edu and we'll get you an answer as soon as we can. We are also recording this session and we will make it available to you, to everyone at the website that you see on the slide in front of you, www.neeadvantage.com/evaluating-remote-teaching. Now let's get into the materials themselves and the resources that we made available last week. These are all available on the same website as I just mentioned, neeadvantage.com/ take you back there, neeadvantage.com/evaluating-remote-teaching. I know many of you have probably downloaded these materials, but if not, you can download those on the right side of the page. All you have to do is enter in your name, email address, school district, and we will, or you will be able to access those materials at this time. The materials are kind of 6-part in nature. First of all, there's the overall guidance and recommendation document titled Adaptability and Growth, Evaluating Effective Teaching in Remote Learning Environments. That has information on how to navigate through some different decisions, how to plan, and what to hold true to in terms of our recommendations for educator evaluation. After that, we also have some templates and some materials that may help further connection and communication between teachers and students and teachers and administrators. The first of those is the Remote Learning Evidence Log, which allows for teachers to communicate to administrators how they are working with a whole class or with individual students through the different effective teaching practices that the school wants to have in place in remote learning environments. The second of those is the Remote Learning Lesson Plan Template, which is a lesson planning template designed for remote learning environments, meant to provide the most engagement, provide the most flow between what's teacher directed and student directed, and what should the expectations be on both sides of that lesson plan. And then with that, accompanying that, we do have a lesson model for effective remote learning as well. If you are a Network for Educator Effectiveness member, within the NEE Data Tool Help and Resources page, you'll also be able to get a couple of other materials. The first one, and this will be the one available in Help and Resources, is the updated NEE Classroom Observation Rubrics. For specific indicators, for the indicators that we have outlined on page 3 of the Adaptability and Growth document, we have added remote learning notes, look-fors, examples, etc. into those indicators. And so you can find those again at Help and Resources within the data tool, type in the search bar, remote learning, and you should be able to find those. Also within the data tool, we have added an EdHub module called Remote Learning Indicators. It's an activity available that will be available soon under the Building Instructional Skills topic within EdHub. That will provide a step-by-step walkthrough of the different indicators that we've outlined as being effective for remote learning as well, for further communication, for further professional learning and professional growth for administrators, for teachers, for anyone who wants to and can access it via EdHub. So do check those out. Again, those materials, the first 4 bullets are available within that overall Adaptability and Growth document. The second 2 are available within the data tool. We also do, within the data tool Help and Resources section, do have the first 4 bullets in there as well. So if you search for remote learning within that Help and Resources section, all of these documents should appear for you. As we get started with engaging in questions and talking about what is important for evaluating remote learning environments, and this is remote learning environments in terms of crisis, as some school districts are experiencing now, and as the country is experiencing now, but it may also just be remote learning environments in general that we want to start evaluating, start looking at a little bit different too. And so the big takeaways today can be focused on this specific time dealing with COVID-19. It can also be focused on more general practices in terms of evaluating remote learning environments as well. We do have 5 big takeaways that are most important to us, for you as instructional leaders, as building and district administrators, to take with you and throughout your plan for evaluating, hold near, hold close to you as you go through that plan. First of all, be proactive. Have contingencies in place with specified practices and timelines that you'll implement given all the possible situations for the year. We know there's a lot of conversations around how each school district is going to look and how students are going to re-enter into schools for this year. With that, there has to be significant plans in place for how are we going to evaluate the effective teaching practices along with the different possible re-entry points, the re-engagement points that students and teachers may be interacting with. And so it's good to plan out that plan A for the year. Also, plan out plan B, think through plan C, plan D, and onward as well in terms of if we're faced with this scenario, how will we move evaluation forward and keep evaluating the effect and effectiveness of teaching on student instruction as well. As you're doing that and making those plans, do revisit your board policy, keep that close to you, and keep any new processes that you are engaging with and that you are implementing in line with the board policy. If need be, think through, do we need to write an amendment to the board policy and get that approved before this new evaluation practice or new evaluation process gets into place. Also, the third big takeaway, communicate in written methods. During times of crisis, over-communication is key. Educators are overwhelmed, as whether those educators are staff, whether they're teachers, whether they're administrators, we're all facing a lot of decisions we have to make, a lot of stresses and ambiguities as well during this time. And so over-communication is key, as well as communication being straightforward and specific. With that, it's also key when talking through evaluation processes, what evaluation is going to look like, and any different plan that you have in place in a written method and communicating that out to teachers via that written method. One of the main reasons for that is to make sure that you get receipts, you get documentation that your teachers are aware that they have seen any new process, any change in process, practice, or system in terms of their evaluation that you are putting into place. And so do communicate, do make sure that communication is written, but over communicate as well. And as we'll mention during the session today, and as we mentioned in our guidance and recommendations, do consult legal counsel if the need arises. For this year, we know most of the evaluation should be ultra low stakes. It should be centered around feedback and growth. Teachers, whether they're in a traditional environment or a remote environment, are dealing with a lot of new features, new challenges, new adversities in their classroom and in their teaching. And so we know that a lot of the evaluation should be focused on starting or continuing the conversations that lead to growth. However, there is always the unfortunate possibility of making high stakes decisions that affect teachers. And so when those decisions do become necessary, do consult your district's legal counsel, move forward accordingly based on their recommendations and what they're prescribing as well. That gets me to the questions that really stood out through the questions you all asked as you registered for today's webinar. And so I'm going to go through 3 questions here first before we branch off and get into questions from the audience as you have those. But do let me remind you that the Network for Educator Effectiveness is not a regulatory agency. We do not make policy, nor do we have mandates. And so the materials we have made available in our answers to questions today are recommendations and guidance that we are making that we believe will best serve your school, district, teachers, instructional leaders, and students. Ultimate decision-making, though, is based on your district policy and or any state directives that may be forthcoming. At this time, especially in the state of Missouri, With our reach out to DESE, we are aware that at this time they're planning for the statutes around evaluation to remain in place as they are traditionally for this coming year. We will, of course, keep you abreast of any changes to that may be coming as well. So let me get into the first of the questions that really stood out from the registrations and the questions that you all wanted answered. The first of those is, how should the observation process work in different environments? So this was mostly geared around, how does remote learning observation look and how do we evaluate remote learning? And so I'm going to first focus on the classroom observation part and break it down into 3 different boxes as you see on the slide. We have the face-to-face strategy, we have the remote strategy, and we have a hybrid strategy as well to work through the observation process. I'm going to start with face-to-face because in traditional classrooms, in the traditional learning environment, that face-to-face classroom observation process that NEE started with, that we continue, should remain true. So continue as you have with the indicators that you had in place or were moving to for the coming year. Again, 6 to 10 observations per year, 10 minutes at a time, 3 to 5 indicators at a time, feedback within 24 hours after every observation. With that though, while it's good to say that's what we're going to do, this is going to be the environment we're going to be in, do be prepared with a plan should you have to move to remote learning environments. Which takes me to the second box. And I want to first talk about what we define as remote. Through our review of literature, through our review of research, we found that a lot of times remote learning was focused on remote learning in online capacity. We also know that not every student, not every teacher, not every school or district has the ability to do that remote online learning. And so our guidance here is based on both remote learning in an online capacity and in an offline capacity as well. And so as you have questions about either one of those, within those questions, please be specific about remote online, remote offline. That may help us tailor our answers a little bit better too. But some general guidelines for observation process in remote learning environments. First, use observation windows in place of the 6 to 10 10-minute classroom observations per year. These observation windows, we suggest, should be about 3 to 4 weeks at a time in length. And the observation windows should then be in time for the teacher and the administrator to collect evidence of how that teacher is providing in their remote learning instruction these same elements of effective teaching, the same practices that we want to see, whether it's a face-to-face environment or a remote environment. We do also recommend that at the beginning, if you are moving to a remote learning environment scenario, that maybe at the beginning you also shorten those observation windows from 3 to 4 weeks to maybe 1 to 2 weeks. That way it provides more feedback to the teacher on the front end of what is strong, what may need to be addressed, may need to be worked with a little bit more to get the students engaged again with those effective teaching practices that we know build student proficiency, student growth, and academic achievement. Also, consider incorporating additional indicators. In our guidance, in that adaptability and growth document, on page 3 of that document, we have a list of indicators that stood out to us from our review of literature and research as most important in remote learning environment settings. And so you can look at those indicators. There may be some overlap between those indicators and the indicators you already use as observation indicators in the traditional classroom setting. If there are, that's great. if there's indicators on that list that you're looking at and saying, oh, that may be a good idea to use in this remote learning environment, look more into that, study that indicator a little bit more, work with administrative teams, or reach out to us here at neemissouri.edu and talk through that indicator a little bit more. What may that look like? We have provided some basic notes on that again within the classroom observation scoring rubrics. But if you want to delve in deeper to that, we would be happy to help, and we would also encourage you to use building leadership teams, district leadership teams within that digging as well. We do suggest that you continue collecting evidence on 3 to 5 indicators. If you are going to add in one of the indicators that stand out as crucial for remote learning environments, do be cognizant of when you add something, take at least one indicator off the plate, if not maybe more, and really focus on what is it that we want to make sure teachers are doing within their lesson planning, within their implementation, and within their reviewing of their remote learning instruction as well. With that, we do have documents to help collect that evidence. We have documents to help with teachers setting up, constructing their lesson plans and how that should look as well. You can again find those at the back of the Adaptability and Growth document. The first of those is the evidence collection log. Again, the feature that will allow teachers to communicate to the administrators how they're incorporating each of the indicators they're being measured on with their students. And then the remote learning lesson planning template and model as well to help teachers that may need a little support in how to structure a remote learning lesson plan to encourage as much student participation, student cognitive engagement, and student outcomes as possible. We do get the question sometimes of how to use Zoom sessions during the classroom observation process. And with that, we do encourage that if you use Zoom, it is only one part of that observation window, because we know what type of situations may arise via Zoom after our spring with districts utilizing that in different capacities around the country. We also recommend that if you are able to use recordings of possible Zoom sessions or other type of meetups that teachers have with students. But if you are doing that, do follow the board policies concerning security guidelines and collecting those recordings, sharing those recordings, and anything else that may show up within your district policy about video use. Then the third scenario is the hybrid scenario, the back and forth that students experience where for a week, maybe for 2 days, they'll be in the classroom, and then for 3 days, 2 weeks, etc., they may be in a remote learning environment. And so with this, the most important part here is to conduct observations in both places. Some of those observations are going to be that 10-minute classroom observation. Some of those should also be the observation windows of how that teacher is doing within their remote learning environment as well. No matter what, if you have teachers in that hybrid environment, do try to get observations of how they're interacting and engaging students in that learning environment in both environments. To do that, especially key here is as you're doing an observation and filling out a classroom observation scoring rubric, whether it's face-to-face or remote, do keep clear documentation of what the setting was. Was this a remote setting? If it was remote, what was the evidence involved? If it was face-to-face, make sure you have the date, the timestamp up to date and current with that, and also again, be as specific as possible as what the class was when it occurred as well. That moves me on to the second of the three questions that really came out during the registration, and that being focused on the student survey. How should the student survey process work in a remote environment? First of all, again, consider the indicators that you're using for for student collection and student evidence of effective teaching practices. When you're doing that, consider the possibility of adding in one or more of the remote learning indicators in a true or hybrid remote learning setting where we're getting feedback via student surveys. If you do include one or more of those, again, do think about taking one or two of the indicators you have used in the past off to keep the survey as short as possible. Something that we definitely don't want to see happening is that students get fatigued from the survey and they're not as accurate as they could be or will be from a shorter survey. Also, be creative if need be to collect student survey data. Part of this comes back to that online versus offline breakdown between remote learning environments. In some cases, you may have to think through, how do I get this student survey data into the hands of students if technology is not able to do it? And so think through, what's that look like via pencil and paper? What's the process look like of who gets that into the student's hands? How does it come back? And then who enters it in as well? We're happy to help with that. As you have questions about that, again, reach out to us at nee@missouri.edu and ask for assistance based on what your current thoughts, current processes are with that, and we'll help you figure out and troubleshoot some other options as well. If you are keeping student surveys in place and you are going to have students interacting with those in the regular online capacity, we do recommend that you narrow the survey windows. In the past, in a traditional classroom setting, it may be fine to have the survey windows for 1 to 2 weeks at a time. But here, we know we need to be a little more cautious, a little more careful with how frequently or what types of opportunities students have to enter in that survey data on teachers. One of the ways to avoid a student entering in data multiple times on a teacher is to narrow the survey window. And when I say narrow the survey window, I'm talking about maybe keeping it open for an hour, maybe even 30 minutes, and saying you have this exact time to take the survey and only that amount of time to take the survey. We do also recommend, if at all possible, to have a proctor in place as students take the survey. This may look, I'll use the example of via Zoom. A proctor may be with a group of students, provide them the website, the token to take the survey on the teacher, watch them as they complete that survey, and then once they're done, that proctor even being able to go in and closing the window on their end right away to, again, minimize the opportunity for students to take a survey on a single teacher multiple times and bias the overall results. Finally, do think of the frequency with which you complete the student survey. For most districts, practices have been to do the survey maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, in that fall and the spring. Do think through what types of data could be beneficial to us to get from the student survey data if we take it on a more frequent basis, maybe 2 times a semester or along those lines, to see and to get students' perspective on how this teacher is working in that remote learning environment as well. That may afford you, again, some really beneficial data to make further professional development decisions, growth decisions for what do we as a staff, small groups of teachers, or individual teachers need to work on to improve our remote learning environments even more. Then the final question that showed up within the registration questions was, how should feedback and documentation look? As always, but even more this year, feedback is crucial. In times of crisis, as I said at the beginning, over communication is key. Specific, being straightforward is absolutely essential. And so with that, if you are observing, if you are evaluating, and any time data is entered in, we do, again, strongly encourage that face-to-face feedback within 24 hours of the data being entered into the data tool. In our review of research and literature around instructional learning and the evaluation of instructional learning, we found that remote learning educators viewed their administrators not as instructional leaders, but as managers. My note here is to be the instructional leader. Your job is not to be the expert on how the remote learning environment should look, because you will have most likely less experience, or at least experience at the same capacity as the teachers you're working with. However, you are the instructional leader and you can guide the instruction, facilitate that improvement through being an active listener, through engaging in feedback conversations, and providing as much support as possible. You do need to know the ins and outs, the struggles, the easy parts of whatever system that your teachers are operating in, providing empathy and care as you're relating to them. When the opportunities provide, please provide informal praise or reinforcement of the efforts that your teachers are making to provide effective remote teaching practices and remote learning environments as soon as you notice that evidence. If the observation window is still open and hasn't closed yet, by all means, do continue to reinforce and praise those parts that are strong, that are working super effectively with students. Also, reinforce the strategies and practices that the teacher has continued to work on. As you're thinking about feedback with an individual teacher, with a small group of teachers, or your whole staff, stay focused on one or two effective teaching practices that give commonality, that find common areas for improvement, and a long-term loop of growth over time, instead of going back and forth between different effective teaching practices. Really focus in and narrow down on those 1 to 2 that you see as extremely important, crucial, and necessary for the teacher to continue implementing well or to continue improving at. Finally, do refer to that guide for effective feedback conversations that we have made available over the past couple of years. Continue using that 5-step plan in place. Prepare for any feedback conversation. Treat it as setting up a meeting agenda. Present the data in an objective way. Discuss the focus, letting the teacher work through and reflect on their own teaching practices, and becoming an active listener during that part, so that together you and the teacher can make a plan for how that growth is going to look, what the deliverables and outcomes are going to be, and when that follow-up is going to occur throughout that feedback cycle as well. With that, I'm going to open up to questions from the chat, and I will hand the microphone over to Kendra.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. We have a couple of questions in the queue. If you all have other questions, please put those in the chat box. First one we'll start with. How does the teacher show evidence of engagement in the virtual classroom? Kathy has offered to show the evidence log if you'd like and if time allows on that.
Sure. Let me get that shared with everybody here. And Kathy. Kathy, are you there?
Sorry, she said she's muted. I thought okay, there we go.
I can't. Can you hear me? It still says unmute.
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry about that. So one of the things that we really considered when we were working on the materials that we thought districts might need was how teachers would provide evidence of what they were doing with students and how they were meeting those indicators. Because as Tom said, you're not going to be able to stop into their classroom and see what they're doing. Obviously, you could visit the classroom on Zoom sessions, or whether it's small group, individual, or whole class sessions, but we thought it would still be very helpful if the teacher had a way of creating sort of a portfolio of evidence. And we wanted it to be able to be presented in such a way that the administrators could easily look through that evidence when they're ready to complete classroom observation form and end that observation window that we're recommending you use. So we've created what is basically a Google form, and we made it into a template. So the directions for using it are one of those documents that you received with the link for the template. You'll provide that link to each of your teachers, and basically what they're doing is recreating that form in their own Google space. Once they do that, they're going to have this particular form that Tom is showing you, and he just substituted his name for the word teacher at the top, so that you will know when you're looking at everyone's evidence log which teacher you're viewing. And then as he scrolls down, there's a place to put in the class list. And that if the teacher has their list of students on a spreadsheet, they can just copy and paste the whole thing in at once. They don't have to enter student names one at a time. You'll notice the first option, instead of a student's name, is whole class. That's so that if the teacher is doing a Zoom session with the whole class, they can just enter it one time and you'll see that that was something they did with the whole class. If they do something with small groups, they'll have to either enter it for each student, or once it goes over to the spreadsheet, they can just copy the row and then change the name for that, however many students were involved. So that will make it a little bit faster for them. So we're scrolling down now through the student list. And the next section is the detail section. In that, we included all of those indicators that we felt through the research that we conducted were the most important when teachers are conducting instruction in a remote learning environment. And of course, the first one is direct instruction, because that still has to take place as well. So the teacher would just click whichever box is applicable for this particular entry in their evidence log. And then they'll go to the next section, which is the description, and they'll put in a description of what it was that they had done. So for example, Tom's putting an example in right now. Some others are, if the teacher was conducting formative assessment, they would just write in there what it was they had done. Once they submit it, each of their entries will go to a spreadsheet, a Google sheet, and they can share that sheet with you. Once they share it, you have ongoing access to that sheet. So in your Google space, you will have a spreadsheet from each of your teachers. You can open it up at any time, take a look at what they've done, note the dates if you're using observation windows, so that you can take a look at what they've done within that particular time period. It's also a great way for teachers to note the contacts that they make with their students, so that they can be sure they're contacting students in different ways, and that no students get kind of slipped through the cracks. So in using this evidence log, the first thing you would need to do is make the expectations clear to your teachers of which indicators you want them to track and how often you want them to be making contact with their students. In some cases, it might be who is going to contact the student, whether it's a special ed teacher, the regular classroom teacher, both, and how often that's going to happen. So once they know what the expectations are, then they can collect the evidence, share it with you, and you can use that when you are closing one of your observation windows. I think that's everything I have. Tom, what would you or anybody else add to that?
There was just one clarifying question on creating the form. Would you recommend that all of those indicators are included or just the ones that a teacher is focused on?
We included all of them so that you would have them available to you, but you can easily remove any that you don't want to include by using the X over at the side. You can even enter some others if there were others that you wanted to track that you normally use in your district. Any of those sections can be personalized.
And then suggestions as to how often to ask teachers to add evidence, and if we have any recommendations for some of those expectations.
As a teacher, if I were using this, I would just put in, pretty much all of the things that I was doing each week. So how am I doing formative assessment that week? How am I doing cognitive engagement that week? So whatever my indicators are, I think I would be putting those notes in there, at least for the big chunks of that particular strategy use. But within your district, you could set other expectations if you wanted them to note something once a week or something once a unit, or, that would be up to you. I think it kind of makes the most sense for them to put in what they're doing as they do it.
And I want to go to that as well. I think setting up district expectations or school expectations for how much evidence a teacher should provide, whether that's the evidence collection log, whether that's pieces of the LMS that tied to the indicators we're measuring, whether that's other types of evidence that the educator is able to provide. I think setting specific, again, expectations of minimum of this, maximum of this, because as always, on one hand, you're going to have educators, as with any other type of person, that will throw the kitchen sink at everything and still not think it's enough. On the other side, you may have people that put one thing in and go, I did that, and move on as well. And so I think setting consistent, building even up to district expectations is going to be key to get the same level of evidence from each teacher.
It might be something that you have to adjust as you go too. Once you get started using it, you might realize you're not getting enough or you're getting more than you need, and you can kind of fine tune those expectations a little bit as you get started using it.
All right, our second question is about exemplar videos. So we have someone who typically shows the teachers the exemplar videos for the indicators they're using in a given year. Are there any exemplar videos in EdHub for online or remote learning indicators?
So we do have mostly the remote learning indicators that correspond with those indicators that really stand out via traditional classroom environments, those face-to-face environments. We have, again, our exemplar videos and scoring practice indicator videos of those, 1.2, 4.1, 5.1, 5.3, 5.3b, and 7.4. We do not have any videos yet or any look yet at what different remote learning environments look like. Once we do that, once we get some of those examples, hint, hint to any and all districts out there, if you want to provide any examples, we'd be happy to take those as well. Once we get those, we will do our best to get those turned around as quickly as possible and get those examples as well. For The indicators that you see that may not be specified by an indicator within EdHub, do still feel free to watch that video and engage with that video. And as an administrative team, as a small group of teachers, or as a whole staff, work through, okay, here's this video of 4th grade language arts. How would this same instruction look like in remote learning environments? Or how would this same instruction be evaluated if we were focusing on one of the indicators that we have listed in remote learning that the faculty may not be as aware of? I do also want to point out that if you are engaging with new indicators, new scoring rubrics for your faculty, for your staff, do take the time to be proactive, work with them to communicate what is the scoring rubric, but also have them engage with it as well about what is the indicator looking for and what does this look like in a face-to-face environment? What does it look like in a remote environment? And have them develop look-fors around that. Again, the main part of our scoring rubrics are that left-hand column, the concrete descriptors. And you'll see that goes up for every indicator, no matter the indicator you use, based on the most objective way possible of how many students or how frequently is this this indicator being used to help drive instruction. And so as you're working with faculty and staff, whether it's on a video, think through, okay, how often is this showing up within my instruction? If it's looking at a lesson plan or a series of lesson plans over 3 or 4 weeks, how often is this element showing up? How often is this effective teaching practice being used in a offline capacity, in a remote online capacity, or in a face-to-face capacity as well?
I don't have any new questions in the chat. One that we had in our webinar yesterday that we will ask again is how to evaluate the technology skills of teachers. And a second part of that is how do we approach PD for teachers with the varying levels of skills and comfort levels with technology.
We do have a specific indicator tied to technological resources, that being indicator 4.2b. We added that indicator 3 or 4 years ago now, and it was for the express purpose of classrooms moving to more work with LMSs and classrooms utilizing technology as the primary resource. And you may want to take a look at that indicator as well for if you want to make sure your teachers are able to implement the technology they are being asked, being required to do. And so do feel free to peruse through that indicator as well. As for professional development, technology, or any new indicators, or anything like that, my strong suggestion is to try to differentiate professional development as much as possible. That's going to create some groundwork on your end as an instructional leader to figure out what does my faculty need, how am I going to assess the needs of my faculty. But you are going to have some faculty that feel very confident and are able to use the technology they are being required to use now in an effective, even really enriching way. You're also going to have some that are close to fluency, and then you're going to have some that have no idea how to utilize it in a truly effective manner. So by differentiating as much as possible, allow for those that already know how to use the technology to explore more about it, or even work on other things. To have the group that needs a little more fluency, working with them with some additional support, some guided support based on the questions, based on the little details they need to know to make their own work something that transfers over throughout time. And then a group with heavily guided instructions on how to use the foundational pieces of the LMS or whatever technology is there, and then continuous work with those. We know that with that level, there needs to be stepping stones, and that's going to require not just a one-off event, but continuous progress and continuous work until they get up to that level of fluency where then they could explore with a little extra oomph and then be able to explore the really enriching, exciting accessory features of the LMS or whatever other hardware or software that they are working with.
All right, as we approach kind of our final minutes here, I think Kathy wanted to mention just one more time the EdHub module that is going to be available this week and some of the resources that will be available in that.
Yes, your question about the indicators and the videos. While we don't have videos of remote learning lessons at the moment, we do have this EdHub module that we created, and we've addressed each of those indicators that are included on the list that we gave you, and just explore why it is that those indicators are, or those instructional strategies are even more important when students are working remotely. And then we've also offered suggestions for their effective use in a remote learning environment. So I think that will be really helpful as you work with your teachers in pointing them at the indicators that you're going to specifically be looking at, but also just about good instruction in general. How do you carry that on in a remote learning environment? So that will be up later today, I believe, in EdHub, and it's in the building instructional skills topic again.
Okay, we don't have any other questions, Tom, so I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, then at this time, we will go ahead and start the wrapping up process. And again, thank you all for your time, for being here and listening today. We know, as always, sometimes questions sprout up in the moment. Sometimes as we get through the day, through the week ahead, there may be other questions. As you have questions, please reach out to us at nee@missouri.edu or at our helpline 844-793-4357. To continue providing additional support, we are also planning a webinar series around evaluating remote learning environments throughout the fall. And so once we have dates firmed up for that, we will be sending that out in a newsletter to all network members as well. So do be looking for that. A recording of today's session will be available soon at neeadvantage.com/evaluating-remote-teaching so that you could look through it, share it with any fellow administrators, instructional leaders that need to hear the information we presented on today as well. With that, thank you all for your time. Thank you all for the work you've been doing, the decisions you've been making over the past few months. We know how valuable you are as leaders, not only to schools, your students and teachers, but to your communities as well. So thank you very much. We're here to support. Be sure to reach out any way, any possible way we could be of help, no matter how big or small that ask may be. Thank you all very much and have a great day.